We're now gonna call the select board meeting to order. First up is public to be heard. Is there anything not on the agenda? Seeing none. Approval of the agenda, we need to add two items, right? Because the Kimball Library assembly permit for the community yard sale.
Yep.
And an assembly permit for the Riley family disc golf event.
And we were going to add the sweet scoop seating to, correct?
Then you'd have the outdoor seating, yeah, request from Sweets.
Is that assembly?
No, but you might want to just sneak it in right after those.
Motion approved with said edits.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar, meeting minutes and warrant approval,
Motion to approve.
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Yeah, we had to have two people missing. All right, consider assembly permit applications. We have one for the American Legion for the Memorial Day Parade, disc golf tournament, our ACDC's First Fridays, East Valley Jubilee, Kimball Library yard sale, and the Riley family. Any reason not to take these all as one? Then I'll entertain a motion.
Are these all approved? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. By police and everything.
Yeah.
All right, motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Happy spring.
Motion carries. Scoops outdoor seating, same as prior years.
Same as prior years, all we need is the certificate of insurance, but otherwise everything from the last 2 years is in place.
Motion to approve contingent upon the insurance certificate.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. East Valley Community Group is asking permission to restore a clock in the building. Any questions or concerns on that one?
Betsy wants to swing from the chimes when they're active again. That's what this is all about.
Yeah. You just
We
might
found
wanna,
another way to make money.
Thrill seeking.
I think the only thing you might want to do is ask the neighbors before you turn the chimes on.
It's what?
Ask the neighbors before you
Oh,
turn the
yes,
chimes on,
already-
because it did not go over good the last time it was.
I've already consulted 3 of them.
Yeah, there's more than that, because it travels quite a ways. Trust me, been there, played that game, but. Anybody have any questions on this project?
I do,
You have a question about it?
yes.
Okay.
If you approve, can we do all the hiring and do all of that? Because we're paying for it. We would
Sounds
make
good.
sure, one of the things that I know we need to have is, the insurance of the vendors or companies. Because they have to carry insurance for their work.
I would think the scope of work and some of that stuff ought to be approved by the town.
How do you mean?
And if you're going to go in and do some construction work on the building, the town ought to approve the work.
So what do you need specifically? They're going to they're gonna put in new mechanisms, they're gonna repair the tower. There's some boards that need replacing, they're gonna paint the tower, and we also can paint the roof. We found people that will do all of that, one company that will do all of that. Finding somebody to paint roofs around Vermont is not easy.
So usually what happens is when you're gonna hire somebody, you write up a scope of what you want them to do. And it has details of the work to be done and what they gotta comply with and whatnot. That scope should be approved by the town before you go hire someone. It'll usually say what they're gonna do, so like the mechanism, the boards, painting the roof, those asks would be in there.
So it's all in their quotes already,
Yeah,
but you want us to write it up as,
I think you got all the meat of it, right?
yeah. Before we can go ahead and say, order parts and stuff.
You have
We'd have to come
multiple,
till the next meeting, as comes to.
So that Trevor can approve it. There just ought to, there needs to be some record of the work that's gotta be done to a town.
Yeah.
structure, that's all.
Yes, absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know, like lots of times if they go into it not knowing what they're gonna get into, then you require as-bills. Which
Okay,
is an image of what they, you know, where they detail what they actually
Okay.
did for work, but.
they have come to, Church Specialties has met with me at the hall. And they've looked at everything and what was there, so they knew what to order. By the way, magically, they were the ones that did the installation of the clock. I don't know how I called the right number, but they were the ones that did the installation back in the 1980s or something like that, 70s. So it's great.
It's in 1986 that it was
Yeah.
repaired last.
Yeah.
My brother passed in 85 and the donations went to fix the chimes. We turned them on 2 days later, the phone call screaming about it were so loud, it never got turned back on.
And by the way, some of that clock fund
It's-
came to the town when the town received the building.
Yeah.
Do you know if we've still got it? Probably not.
I think
went
it
to
all
the-
went into the one fund for the,
Yeah, I think so.
for the,
Went to
the
the,
hall. It's in, there should be a fund account for that.
I don't think there is anymore, but not a special one. So it's okay. It was only 1,700 or something like that
I'll tell you what.
at that point. So I'll get a document to you.
Well, if we vote to approve it. Don't get ahead of us. We were cruising.
Yeah, I'm cruising along here. Yeah.
All right, anybody have any other questions on the project? Not entertain a motion to allow them to go along, it's when they submit a scope for government's approval.
So moved.
And that's the clock and the roof.
All right, I have a motion and a second, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Next up, discuss a VHCD grant cupola restoration for Kimball Library.
Amy is here.
So I'm Amy Grasnick, I'm the director of Kimball Library. I want to start actually with gratitude for all the help we got with the assembly permit, which is a new thing we've never done before. So thanks to Judy, Scott, Andy, and if I'm missing anybody, thank you to your team for helping us run that gauntlet. I want to catch the select board up with what's going on with the restoration of the cupola. You may have noticed on April 21st and 22nd, there was a gigantic lift worked in our front yard along with a porta potty, which I thought was a nice garden feature. We have the library trustees hired Baylor Riley Wilson, their architect out of Albany, to do all the pre-construction work, the crafting of the bid documents, helping us with negotiations, and then doing the construction management. They came to do their first deep dive or deep climb, I guess, to assess the condition of the cupola. So while I have not yet received the preliminary report, I expect it maybe tomorrow, early next week. I did glean some information from the engineer and the architect who were on site. So I learned things like overall, the copper is in good condition as far as they can tell because there are coatings on some of it, which is great news. Not such great news is the construction methods that were used in some parts of the cladding encourage water incursion rather than discourage it. So hard to say until they actually get into it, what that will mean for the wood structure underneath. But it will be something that they will consider as they come up with the scope of work and the specifications for the restoration itself. So I'm feeling super excited. We're actually taking a step for getting the leak in the cupola halted. Any questions about where we are with that project or our timeline? You know, the next step, once the trustees and I have reviewed the preliminary report, will be for TRW to craft the bid specifications, and then that goes off to the National Park Service. And they do go through it with a fine tooth comb to make sure that the methods, the means and methods that TRW proposes to use to restore the cupola are appropriate, and will last for a good long time. So that, unfortunately, the approval part, we expect to take a couple of months. Once that is done, then the TRW can finalize the bid specifications and the project can go out to bid. So fingers crossed, we're hoping that 2026 will be the year that we actually get the dome restored. So that's where we are with that. Now I'm going to take a little step back and bring back up the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board grant, which I know has been on your agenda more times than you would like. And being an information professional and operating in facts, I'm just going to lay some facts out here for you. So the first fact is that Kimball Library has secured $250,000 in federal grants from the National Park Service to help restore the cupola. The next fact is that if you're paying attention to the news at all, you know that any kind of federal funding is really vulnerable right now. One of the first executive actions that President Trump took was to freeze every federal grant that has been awarded, which in my world caused a lot of consternation and concern, and maybe in yours it did too. So can we count on getting that federal money? I honestly don't know. And that I try not to let that keep me awake at night, but indeed it does. So moving on to the next fact. In 2023, I think, Trini, you actually appointed me to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, although that was years ago, so what do I know? Anyway, we applied for $100,000 from VHCD to help pay for the cupola. And I turned around and they awarded $150,000, which you could knock me over with a feather, because how often do you apply for a grant and get more than you ask for? That never happens in my world. VHCB regards Kimball Library as being of, as they say in their quotes, outstanding historical significance. Among other things, it's on the National Historic Register. So it's like a prime example of a turn of the century public library in New England. And because it is considered to be of outstanding historical significance, the VHCB grant requires a perpetual historic preservation easement. The reason for this is because VHCB's interest is that the building remains usable, right? That the community can continue to use it, that it's accessible and it's in good condition. And also that the existing historic elements that make it outstanding, so the facade, the roof, the dome, the stained glass, the windows and doors, some of the interior finishes that are original, they want to see that those elements are preserved using appropriate materials and methods and with longevity in mind. And the Secretary of the Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties is the yardstick that is used nationwide for determining means and methods. Depending on whether you're restoring wood, you're restoring copper, whatever you're restoring, there are guidelines. Which is great, because I'll tell you that my coursework for a master's degree in library science included 0 classes when it came to facilities management. I came to Kimball Library and I knew nothing about how to manage a building. And I certainly had no experience managing a historic building. And so I look back at 2 projects that I've managed in my 23 years there, and I know they would have likely had much better outcomes if I had expert historic preservation advice. So if you look at the basement windows, for instance, those were replaced with vinyl replacements, which seemed logical at the time, but is not the most sustainable choice. And if you come up the front steps, a couple of the masonry blocks that had deteriorated over time so that water was coming under the porch have been replaced, but they have not been replaced appropriately. So those are two, I'm laying it out there. There are two projects there that I really regret. And I feel like the VHCD easement introduces guardrails. It protects against well-meaning but ignorant decisions by future library directors and trustees, because I'm not going to be there forever. Whether that makes you happy or sad, at some point I will retire and all of my institutional knowledge will go away. And I can pretty much guarantee that in the future, the next library director is also not going to have taken any coursework that helps them with facilities management. So in my mind, having guidance from historic preservation experts protects the town's resources. Maintaining the library building ensures that the investments that have been made by the town, which are many, and not just for the building itself, but for all of the services that are provided there, that those investments are not squandered. I know there are concerns that the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board will override town decision-making about capital expenditures. And I thought about that, and I talked to a law librarian at the Vermont Law School, and I asked her to help me look back as far as 2001, which is as far back as the online database goes, to see whether the HCD has ever sued over a historic preservation easement. And then I confirmed with Elizabeth Egan, who has been the legal counsel at VHCD since 1995. In her tenure there, they have never done so. So what this says to me is that VHCD wants to help the owners of buildings that they have recognized as being of outstanding historic significance, preserve those buildings, make sure that they are usable and useful to the community for as long as possible. They want to, they're there to help. That is what I truly believe, and that is what representatives from VHCD have said over and over again. So I know your challenge as a select board is to balance the risks you perceive and the benefits you anticipate, and you need to make the best decision to meet the community's needs based on that calculus. So here's why I'm here today. The grant was awarded in 2023. The term of the grant ends in June 20th of this year. And I know VHCB will grant an extension because I asked them. They really are invested in seeing the library preserved for today and for the future. And I keep coming back to the fact that I applied for $100,000 for this grant and they awarded 50% more. So what I'm asking you is to consider these facts, to review the historic preservation easement, and I brought copies in case, you don't have it to hand, which why would you? And then come back in June and vote on whether to accept that easement. Of course, I hope that you will. I certainly view that the benefits of accepting this money outweigh any potential for VHCB to overreach, to meddle, as somebody might perceive it that way. So that's my position. And so, Alyssa, do you want me to email this to you?
Yeah, that would be great. And Larry's online too, it looks like now.
Okay, Larry, also to you.
Yes, that'd be great.
And also we'll send it to Molly. She's not here to ask, so I'm just going to do it. Thank you.
Any questions from anybody on the presentation? All right. Thank you. Next up on the agenda is to consider a land donation. We're going to delay this item because the neighbors are talking about with them at this point, and we're really hopeful that's successful. It's not like that. So next up, we have an appointment of a cemetery commissioner. Do we have any questions on that one? Anybody want to compete for the job? Many volunteers on that one. Hearing none, any motions to approve? One.
Motion to appoint Larry Donovan. Any seconds out there?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Trying to scroll down.
Next up, we have the UTV policy draft that was provided by the village fire department. What's the easiest way to give you all my comments? I'm guessing sitting here going through them one by one isn't gonna be the best way.
No. You should have sent it to me beforehand. I could have answered them or.
I think
So we got them Tuesday, Andy, so.
No, I
Just to
understand.
read through them, we'll get them back, but
so I shared them and then Trevor added to them and the rest of the board hasn't added to them
Alright.
yet, but so it's. Maybe just an overview of what you're trying to achieve with the policy and the pieces, and then we can
Sure.
hammer out.
I think, the overall purpose of it, was just to have a general policy, that says we're gonna operate this safely, we're gonna have, set training, the fire department's gonna set. But it was trying to keep it generalized so that the fire department still has some control over, where it's used, when it's used. The training that needs to happen, no different than anything else that happens in the fire service and the fire department. What trainings we do, all that is what we decide. So we kind of kept it general there. And that's basically what we tried to do was, I know there was a lot of question about the transporting piece. So I kept that general in that, me and Trevor talked about, you have the general purpose truck. Now, me and Trevor talked that I do have some current concern. I do have concerns about that because like yesterday when I stopped in to sign stuff, the truck wasn't here. Right, because it's general use, right? So now if the village has an emergency, what do? I'm gonna have to have a personal vehicle tow it to the emergency. I'm
Or
not,
another town vehicle, right? We've talked about that whole
right,
there's other vehicles besides
Right.
just that one. Yep,
well, I wasn't talked to about that,
it might have been before you took this great project
Right.
over.
so here's
That's probably
my,
what some of the comments in here
and
are.
that could be, I mean, but here's my piece of it is that, I feel like, okay, we have this general purpose vehicle. I'm gonna trust that it is rated correctly, it's got the right ball and hitch in it, all that. I know that I have members in my department that have very capable trucks that are rated for more weight than that, all of that. So I'm gonna task those guys with towing it and approving them to tow it. Because instead of trying to wait for a town truck, I have guys that have capable vehicles that I can get it to an emergency. Right, so we don't have to try to find a town employee, we don't have to do, so I try to keep the policy general in that I get the town wants us to use this general purpose vehicle. There are times that I'm not willing to, may not be willing to wait to try to find it. If it means being able to use the UTV to rescue someone, to stop a grass fire, anything like that. So I kept it general there. I was also sent, and I believe that personal vehicles are covered, no different than responding. And I mean, I think before my time, this was gone over like a million times. I was sent this, Emergency Service Departments or Organizations Automobile Direct Physical Damage Endorsement. This is from VLCT Passive Coverage, basically saying very generalized. There's more specific things in here, basically saying that it goes down to the fact that as long as you follow certain parameters, like getting our records checked, that kind of stuff, which none of us have a problem getting our motor vehicle record checked. Also, we have all good licenses. Most guys have CDLs now that are on the department. And this says basically if the vehicle that we're driving is covered, has to be covered by automobile insurance. Anything that's not covered by the first responders insurance, this endorsement would take over. So I feel that that doesn't change anything as long as we're using it appropriately. And that's why the policy says no 9-pound trucks approved by the chief. As long as we fall under those criteria, I believe the first responders insurance is going to cover whatever happens to their truck. I believe the trailer and the UTV being on the town's, I don't know the name of it, but that list of where, no different than our engine and that kind of stuff, that list of insured things, everything's going to be covered. That's how I read it. So as long as we that's why I kept it general in that, I don't know what's going to come down the line, of potential, me and Trevor have talked about some other stuff with, other trucks down the line, if something, if there's a 250 or something bigger. So that's why I just kept it general, that I think it covers what everybody wants and is looking for, and making sure that town's covered. I'm covered, as the fire chief. So that's kind of why, it's kind of general. I understand that. But it's that way for a reason. Just because it's just keeping things general so the department can pick trainings, that kind of stuff. Not sure if there's another, I wasn't here the last meeting, Dan was. There was some other concern about who would be willing to operate it.
I think there's some concern over, about who's able to operate it and who's able to give permission. So if we're in a different scenario, like a flood scenario, and Scott's in charge, Scott ought to be able to access that vehicle for response too, or tell somebody to take it and do whatever. Like, he'll be in charge of some of your folks at that point. So having just the fire chief of Randolph Village be the only one that can tell somebody, that they can use it, that's a little bit of an issue, but we can work through that.
I think, can I just answer to that?
Yeah.
So I think, and so this piece of apparatus, I believe, is no different than what I'm tasked with fire engines, with the tankers, anything like that. So I don't believe, and I've been on the department a while, been through a lot of floods. Obviously it's new with new emergency coordinators. So some of that's new. I've had discussions with Scott over, hey, how can I help you? And, so we all have our specific tasks, either a line officer of the environment or the emergency management coordinator. But the emergency management coordinator in any situation I've been in, they give a direction, and then it's one of the to the department, and it's one of those line officers or the chief that's going to then delegate out how that apparatus is used, who's going to use it. So I don't believe that this UTV should be any different than my fire engine, my tanker, anything like that. I'm still tasked with the responsibility of those trucks, no matter if there's an emergency management coordinator or not. I'm still responsible for those vehicles, so that's why it's written the way it is.
But you may not be there, so the fire chief shouldn't be the one giving approval.
I think it says
If any outside request, which would be Scott, for use must be approved by the fire chief. That's what I got a problem with. I don't want one person.
So we can change that to say, RVFD chief.
Well, these are some of the comments that I have that you'll have to catch up with. We were just looking for a basic, what is it? I don't want to get in going line by line because we'll be here all night.
No,
And I don't have that much time.
right, and So,
we do need to work through some of this. There's some questions also, like usually an ATV by state law, you have to have a helmet on. Is a fire department helmet compatible with a DOT helmet? Like what's usually required? Like it's questions like that. We say you don't need a seat, you need a seatbelt, but only something about if
because,
circumstances require. And I'm like,
right, so I
you
just,
have it or you
just,
don't have it.
just to
Like,
answer
that
that
type of
is,
thing. Yeah, I don't want to go into the details because I don't think we have time tonight, but we'll get our comments to you on it, and then we can sit down and go one by one, so you know sort of what. Instead of one piece by piece.
just so you know, my position is still gonna be, like, we wanna keep it generalized
Mhm.
to cover a lot of different situations. And making things very specific in this policy that we don't have, you know, in this very situation, making things very specific, I believe is not ideal in the fire service. I'm still, so that's just my position, so you know, while we, and I have no problem with doing that. I just want you to know that that's my position, is to make sure it's very generalized so that the department who is gonna be responsible for it has, you know, the responsibility and keep that policy generalized.
Okay. Anybody else on the board have any questions on this? The screen, and I'm not seeing anybody coming up from me. Anybody from the public have any questions on it? We'll get our comments together and then send them over to you, and then if you want, the two of us can even sit down. and go through 'em.
So just so you do know that we've ordered the trailer, it's 6 to 8 weeks on now, 4 to 6 to 8, so 4 to 6 weeks out probably. So hopefully we can get a time to get together for June, for you guys to approve it, because we're hoping to, before July 1, to have it, especially with the hospital. Them pulling that out around the same time, going to the room in the station and stuff, so hopefully before the June meeting, we can get together at some point, even so it's all.
Next up is the ethics ordinance draft.
Yep, wanted to give you a chance to look at it before we launched into adoption. We'd schedule this for the next meeting. This is part of the newish within the last year and a half, statewide ethics requirements for municipalities. We talked about it when we appointed a designated representative and how we wanted to handle that. What we've said all along is until we've developed the ordinance, we follow BLCT's model. That's what this is based on. Essentially, what the ordinance lays out is who the ethics law covers, how complaints are handled, what the enforcement actions might be, and what happens if somebody wants to appeal our decision based on that. And so the way it would work, say we had a complaint came in that wasn't about me and it wasn't about one of you, as the designated rep, I'd be the one charged with investigating and then making a recommendation based on, is this a valid complaint or is it not, using the available information, and then recommending action if it is a valid complaint. Some of these cases, it would be, you know, we're talking about elected officials other than you, the options aren't very broad. You can talk very sternly about your level of disappointment, but really only voters can take any kind of action. If it's an appointed official, you might have other actions. If it's an employee, it would fall under the personnel policy or a collective bargaining agreement, and have more for the manager's thing to deal with at that point in terms of implementing any enforcement actions. You know, so the statewide code's up on the website. We've created a form that goes with it. That was in the packets, made it a fillable PDF. Complaints have to be in writing. We have them set up so that they're not anonymous. I have to know who I can talk to try to validate information. Otherwise, it can be awfully hard. Just waste an awful lot of time. And we encourage folks to be as detailed as possible because that's going to make it as effective as possible. So, and then one of the other things we'll have is a little tracking sheet. So each year we could keep track of how many complaints. So we'll have at some point some required training you and I are the ones that are fully required to take it under the law. But we could set it up in a way where everybody takes it. We just sort of open it up broadly and invite other committee members. Maybe we can even do it as part of a meeting if it's not too long. Or just send it around to everybody and say, send me an email or other certification that you've completed it. I think there's an online version. Like I said, this models the VLCT standard one. I don't love sections of this. I think I've said it before. I have zero problem with setting ethical standards for everybody. It'd been nice to see it apply to everybody up and down our governmental chain. But I'm a little worried about the use of it, right? And then I think it will be, when somebody gets an issue they don't want, it's gonna be an ethics complaint. When somebody hears no, when they want it a yes, it's gonna be an ethics complaint. And that's kind of a big concern. And there's no way to say,
Required to do it, right?
we're required to do it. There's no way to say, even if the responses are dilatory, we know they're gonna most likely be unfounded. We have to treat each one with seriousness and intent and go through the process. The tracking sheet will also help keep track of how much time we, thankfully, I don't want to say it, I was like calling Beetlejuice probably, but we don't have some of the individuals other communities have that will file a complaint a day out of sheer malice or boredom. But if we ended up in that spot, that becomes pretty time intensive pretty fast. But unlike a public records law, there's no way to charge anybody for any of that effort. We just do it.
Anybody have any questions on the draft that's there or any comments about it?
I feel like one of those what it is type thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, we don't really have a lot of say in it.
I give you the illusion of control when really
We don't have any.
practically you don't have a lot, unfortunately, yeah.
You have a question about the municipal?
Just the general question, what kind of experience has the town had with ethics complaints? Is there a policy now or not?
No,
Well, we do have a policy in place that's been in place since the early 2000s. There's,
but not like this one.
right. There's never been any complaint. And then individual officials might be under a separate professional code of ethics. So I have one particular to managers and administrators, both a statewide one and an international one. They adhere to that's a little more stringent than. But this is, it's fairly general. It focuses a lot on conflicts of interest, really. I mean, it's kind of a glorified framework for that. Most of the ethics potential violations are really what you'd consider probably financial or relationship-based conflicts.
But we haven't had, I mean, knock on every piece of wood you can find, we haven't had any.
No,
Now they have a
It's a
policy.
solution looking for a problem.
yeah.
Right, anybody, any other questions about it? We ready for a motion on that?
We just have the motion to approve it.
Well, what I'll do is put it together and we'll warn it up and then you can adopt it at the next meeting. And that way we give people another bite at the apple if they want to.
You guys have a public hearing for it?
I might even set it up. I gotta go back and review statutes, see if we have to with something like this, do a full. If we do, we will, and then it's effective 60 days from the date of adoption, but we'll use it from now forward, should we have a complaint. There's a separate tab on the website under the about. You go to about and down at the bottom, there's the municipal ethics, and I'll put this up there, but the forms up there. We have statewide codes up there, so if anybody wants to see that stuff.
I was ready to move it.
I mean, if you want to, and we can sort through if we need a hearing later, but.
It's not a ordinance.
This would be, yeah, this is ordinance form rather than policy. If it were policy, yeah, you could just,
I thought it was an ordinance.
it ties into the recommendations from the lead and Secretary of State and others. I think to strengthen the enforcement tools.
Of which we have none.
We
Right.
can,
We can have a conversation with them and be like,
well, we could make loud.
you're all on the voters.
Yeah, and we can make loud noises too, but not, There isn't a lot.
All right, moving right along. Tax stabilization for the My Place Hotel. So we have gotten packets on this. We got some supplemental materials on this. So, not sure what the best way is to go on this. In our prior ones, when we had the actual, they sort of told some about the project, what the project was they were doing. And then we did questions. Does that approach make sense?
Fine.
And just hit the,
So you have your packet, you've seen what, what the situation is with the structure of the building. We started this process probably last June or July,
June
and
20th.
so, when was it, Paul?
June 20th.
June
That's
20th.
when the town received the letter from us.
And so, through this process, I was told, and when I sat there where you sat, we granted these, I granted one to LED and one to Motio Rec. And so, on this very similar information that we provided to you. And so, that process didn't take very long, and I'm not sure why this has taken so long. But anyways, Paul met with Mark Rizabo a number of times. I met with Mark in November. I met with Trevor in February. And so finally, we've gotten to this point where, we've given you what was asked. Mark told me that we checked all 3 boxes of the criteria. And so, we're looking for the same treatment that the other entities that in the past have received. And in my time here, I know that tax stabilization agreements were granted to Vermont Castings when Vermont Castings came in to build a foundry. Du Bois and King, that building was also under stabilization agreement. Freedom Foods, LED, and most recently with Motio Rec. And so it appears as though, from what I'm gathering off from people talking to me in social media, that there seems to be a lack of understanding of what tax stabilization agreements are for and what they do. And so I believe that, if you have any questions about that, I think that's where you as a board need to understand what it is that, you're doing and what we're looking for here. But typically they are used for economic development projects to be able to provide some relief so that a business can get stabilized. And that's what it's been used for in the past, and that's what we're looking for. Any questions?
I don't.
You don't, okay.
So I don't think I've heard any argument that you check all the boxes on the policy. I think that's been agreed to. Mark has been pretty vocal about that piece. Some of the pieces that I've seen heard is that it was based on some of the resistance or the change in how it's being looked at is reading the policy and coming to a different process or things that weren't done prior. But I think everybody can agree that our policy needs to be changed and we need to be clearer with what the expectation is and what we want. That is not clear. But I think you're right. And with the ones I was able to go back and look at that I was involved in, we gave the same solution to. It was the same agreement, same solution. And we didn't follow the policy completely because we didn't look into a lot of the pieces that it said we can. It doesn't say we have to, it says we can. We didn't dig into those. In this case, we dug into a lot of those. So I think the better approach here is to have any board members that have questions about the project or the need for the stabilization piece, ask those first.
What is the request at this point? 'Cause I feel like there's been different,
The request is for the same treatment that you gave the other previous applicants.
so 0%.
0 for 5 years and then ramped up 20% a year for the next 5. So that you're at 100% in the beginning. Now, another misconception that keeps happening out there is everybody thinks that we're asking for total tax stabilization for everything. It's not true because we still have to pay the school tax.
Correct.
Okay, and so that's something that's floating around out there. And then the other thing that came back to me was the fact that, we haven't paid any, which is not true. We've been paying taxes on that property since we purchased the property. So we have been meeting our tax obligation. And so, I don't know where this stuff comes from, but I think it comes from the fact there's a lot of people who do not understand what the policy is and what the policy is supposed to be used for and how it's applied. And so that I think is where it's coming from. And maybe some from the fact that a lot of people don't understand business and don't understand business models and how long it takes to stabilize a project.
So to be, the other ones that we did not do any stabilization on the land. They continued to
That's
pay the
fine.
taxes on the land, just like they
That's right.
did before the project came in.
We're just looking to
The
be on people.
stabilization is on the building itself and the investment into the
Exactly.
property. So any site improvements, the building, those type of pieces
Correct.
are what we stabilized on them.
We're looking to be treated like everybody else that has asked for it, no different. We all want to be on a equal playing field in the community. Doesn't make a difference who you are. Everybody should follow the same until a policy is enacted and in place. And that's not, it doesn't seem like.
So, the one thing that, I don't know about your project was there's some talk that there might be additions to the hotel, like the conference center and the restaurant. Can you talk about?
If the right opportunity arises and there's an investor that wants to be involved in that project, that certainly could happen. It was permitted for an 84 room.
So
Okay.
what would that look like? Yeah, I guess that's my question. So you have 64
In order
rooms.
to get there, is that what how do we get
No, like,
there?
I guess like, do you have plans in place to do that already? And what does that look like? And
As the
so,
business
where are you
improves, that is still on the agenda, is to bring up the room number to the 84 rooms. Okay, but that can't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because when we looked at the data and from the hospitality studies, we knew we could support the 64 room project. Along with that, over the period of time, the cost of this project had gone up 30% from the time we originally proposed it pre-COVID. So luckily for us, the average daily room rate in the state, increased at the same time. So the project was still bankable when we went back to it to be able to bring it together. Through that process, there were also some other struggles where the goalpost kept getting moved and we were required to raise more capital to be able to meet the needs of the bank. So with that, we got help from the Agency of Community Development and we got help from VITA. And in order to get the project over the hurdles to get it so we get to the point where we could actually build something. Otherwise, this project would have been dead in the water 2 years ago. And so without that help, that's what it took to get it here.
Mm-hmm.
And now what we're looking for from the town is, the same kind of help that we got from the state agencies.
As far as the restaurant, we're permitted for it, but we haven't had a lot of inquiries and stuff, so.
I haven't
We're
had a
sort-
chance to actually go up and look at it. That's why.
Okay, yeah, we're pad ready, but we.
So does an outside pad, someone would build on that?
Not yet. It's just ground.
It's just
Just
ground.
ground.
It's just ground.
Infrastructure is in place
We're in place.
to do that, along with the parking lot improvements. So the whole parking lot is designed to take the entire load. But
Okay,
can't build a load until we see the demand.
sure, yeah, I'm not asking.
And the
for my
operator
needs, but I
of
just-
a restaurant too, has been daunting to find.
Yeah, oh, well, yeah.
So I think some of the confusion, and we've talked about this, so I know you know the answer to this, or I wouldn't put you on the spot. One of the dynamics that you struggled with is the location, right? There is no business model for such a rural hotel that just says, this is what your labor costs, this is your power cost,
Correct.
this is your everything. So you're right now sitting in a position where you had a budget. And the budget was created kind of as time went on, based on some of the
Hospitality study.
hospital, yeah, and the similar pieces
similar projects in other locations, but they're not Vermont locations.
for this rural of an area
Yes,
to attract customers, but also attract a labor force and whatnot.
right.
And so part of the stabilization is building what those costs are. So you can get a better grip on that and figuring out kind of the room rate,
Right.
how those things all balance out to give you an operational,
Exactly.
at least net zero, but preferably with a
Right.
plus sign on it.
So we have a management company that manages, I'm not sure how many projects or how many hotels. But they're the ones that are charged with making sure that they're watching our numbers for us. They're managing the labor, they're managing the budget. They're watching. They use comps from other properties, but those other properties are in the south. And so things like winter snow plowing, they didn't allow enough for that. Our snow plowing bill for December was $8,000. Okay,
Before we got the snow.
all right. The budget for the entire year for snow plowing and for lawn mowing was 25,000. So in the first month, we burned through a third of that. So at that point, Paul and I took on snow plowing for the winter. And we took care of managing the hotel project so that we could at least get close to managing our budget. So those are the kind of things that we're running into as far as, how do we don't know what our numbers really should look like. We don't know what the budget looks like until we get through a period of time. And that period of time is at least a year.
And there are also issues like, when we projected, the occupancy of the hotel, we didn't realize that, we would lose all the Canadian customers. So we're clearly 10%, well, all the hotels in Vermont are about 10% short of tourists. And that's the risk.
Unforeseen thing.
Yeah, that's the risk of business, and that's part of why it might take longer to stabilize than we thought when we started.
Unless we get the 51st state.
That's right. Use the border like this did,
I don't know,
Anyway,
it's all a gamble.
but
at
that
this
won't be
point.
quick either, right? So that's after the initial
knows?
period.
but
But to give you an idea where we're marketing to, we're working on things like trying to create golf packages. All right, so that we can partner with Montague, all right, and figure out, okay, can we attract some people up here to come up and play golf for the weekend and bring their spouse? And, she can go walking around the downtown village and maybe she'll do some shopping and they'll, spend some money at at one of the restaurants.
Maybe she'll be the one golfing and he'll be the one.
Well,
shopping.
maybe. I don't know. Could be any of that stuff. But I mean, those are some of the things that happened. Over the winter, we were pleasantly surprised. Okay, when, all of a sudden we had cars in the parking lot. I drove through there one Friday afternoon and there's cars in there from New Jersey and from Massachusetts, Connecticut. And, I walked in to just check on what was going on. And all of a sudden, hey, it snowed and there were some skiers that came. And, the model worked. I talked to one family and they said, hey, this is great. We like it here. We're 45 minutes from the nearest ski area and there's a kitchenette. And so I don't have to take my family, out every night while we're here. I can, cook some stuff here and, we can fix our stuff for lunch the next day. So that was what the model told us was going to happen. We knew that, to go from the original model, which was a standalone just rooms to the where every room right up there now has a kitchenette in it, was what the hospitality study said. So on that side, they're right, because that seems to be working.
But you gotta market that.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what we're trying to do right now. Is we're
Experience that.
actively marketing and spending money, trying to build a clientele that will come here. And so golf packages are one thing, teaming up with the trails group and trying to get them involved and bringing some biking stuff in here. Looking at in September, we know we have the bike race. Okay, so we're going to actively pursue those folks because they're here, Labor Day weekend, riding through the community. Well, it'd be nice to have them stay the night instead of taking off and going to Killington. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to build. But, it takes time to build this stuff up.
And you partnering with the snowmobile club.
Yeah, and we partnered with the Snowmobile Club. Paul and I cut a trail from the hotel. We've got permission to go across the VTC field. Went up there, planted a sign, and lo and behold, we had a few people that, had put it on their destination trip. There was a gentleman that I met who started out in Brattleboro and drove to the northern border and drove back down through and stayed with us one night. He said, last year he couldn't do that. He had to go to White River. So he was very appreciative that he showed up at 8:30. So anyways, that's what this is all about, is to try to have, is to have the time to be able to build and get that thing stabilized so that we can, eventually get to the next stage. And maybe we'll find somebody like a brew pub or something that wants to land up there, and that would be a huge asset to the community. But right now,
So that's kind of the tourism piece.
Yeah.
Of it. And you're in that stable, figuring out that whole piece, but you're also figuring out who your partners are in the
Right.
community, right? Like,
well, we know who our partners are. I can tell you,
ARA.
Norwich University, okay, they're using us a lot, Vermont Law School, Gifford, okay, is using us a lot, VTC. So, those are the players, those are the people that are, and then, I hear different things from different people, somebody came to work on somebody's piece of machinery. And instead of staying in White River, they were able to stay here so they could work on, a piece of machinery, an LED, or I think Sam might have had somebody like that.
But you get extra hours out of them too, right? Because you're not paying them to travel
Yeah, we
that
get,
hour at the end and the beginning of the day, right?
yeah, we've been using the hotel quite a bit, for our business. We used to put people up at Capitol Plaza or down in White River, Lebanon. And we've got machine technicians who come in from all over the country. We have equipment dealers, customers, suppliers. Next week, we've got a director of potential hire, director of operations staying there 4 nights. It's way better for us from a cost standpoint in terms of having to cover those people's expenses, but also getting them familiar with the community. And Ike, who's coming next week, I mean, he'll eat 8 meals in this community. He's not, as great as the kitchenettes are, he's not gonna eat in the kitchen.
Not everybody's gonna have, right?
It's been a huge benefit for us. And, we had a group of farmers come from Wisconsin recently to buy animals from Miles's place, and they stayed there and loved it. We've got family who stays there. And I just remember from Vermont Creamery days, we would bring immense numbers of customers and bloggers and cheesemongers to central Vermont, and we never have a place for them to stay. And so we'd have to give that business to, Barry, Montpelier area or south of us. So it's definitely had a direct impact on our business. And, and just from me as a general consumer in the community, I've used to go into restaurants and see everybody else around there and know everybody in there. And now I go into restaurants in the community and I'm like, who are all these people and where are they coming from? And oftentimes I go and talk to them and they're staying in the hotel. So I think that's, a cool thing. And, I'm in favor of the tax stabilization, because I think we're toying with precedent here, and I'm concerned about the precedent that it could set for other business people who want to invest in this community, and the taste that could leave in their mouth if they don't feel supported. And the fact that it has a long-term immense impact to increase the grand list. So that's, those few things there. I think it's a good investment for the community. And like I said, I think it'll pay itself back in the long run.
So, go ahead.
So my thought is what does it cost the town? And it doesn't cost the town anything. The road is the state road. Town has no maintenance fees, anything adapt to it. By the town not, say, granting this, which I hope they very much that they do, the school, which is our biggest cost to our tax dollars, is actually going to still get all of their money. So it doesn't cost us a municipality. He's going to pay a sewer bill because he's coming down the sewer line, right?
Mhm.
Which adds to the capital of the sewer.
Yeah, we're
That type of
supporting
thing.
that. We're not asking for anything
So-
during that.
By granting the stabilization, is it going to cost the municipality anything? Because he took a piece of farmland, well, the group took a piece of farmland that was paying nothing comparatively to the town in taxes. And he's gonna actually help us with this enormous education cost that keeps going up and going up and going up every year. But it's not gonna cost the municipality anything to do this. Because you don't plow it, you don't maintain the road, there's nothing there that's an actual cost to the municipality. So to me, this is a no-brainer, the economic development piece of it, the state supports them by a couple of different grants. I think it's the best interest, and what he's bringing into the town, that are, like he says, you know, the snowmobilers, the skiers, all of that. The ability for Gifford Hospital to have, you know, their conference or their thing that happens, a family to come here and actually visit a loved one that's in the hospital, that has no place to stay. So I think there's nothing but positives here by doing this one. And the one stabilization that we made was for when I was on the select board, you know, a lot of years back. We did it for Vermont Pure. And we had a lot of employment. At one point, they had about 120 employees up there. And he can show it through his employee numbers, whether it be, you know, a young person that comes in and gets their first job, or, you know, because I remember when they put McDonald's in, there was a little bit of, you know, angst about having McDonald's. How many kids have that employed McDonald's over the years, you know? And was it a good thing? So I just have to say, this costs the town nothing, and it's only but gain for the town. And in 10 years, you get 100% gain on a piece of property that was a farmland. They've stuck their neck out on the line to get it there, and it's helping the community tremendously. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ashley Lincoln, and I'm here wearing a couple of hats this evening. I would like to really jump on with what Sam and Joe have both said. With my Gifford hat on, I would like to state that we, without a doubt, support the hotel. We are grateful for having the hotel here locally. Unfortunately, we still rely pretty heavily on traveling nurses. And having a location that is on pavement when we are attracting folks from southern parts of the United States that don't want to drive on a dirt road, it has really provided them an opportunity to stay somewhere that is safe, that is accessible. They are also, like, pointing out, while they might be cooking occasionally in their rooms, they are frequenting the downtown eateries. So there is that economic impact. Yesterday alone, we had some consultants in the building who were so excited that they could stay locally, saying in the past they've had to stay in White River or Montpelier, and they were looking forward to eating at SAP. And we said, we hope you have, you know, a reservation. So I think it's just really something that I am requesting as an employee in this town and as a taxpayer, that our select board be consistent and they be the same leader in every room. If we're saying that this is something we have done for other businesses, I don't know why we would be questioning why we would do it for this one. I have an enormous amount of respect for these business leaders to invest they're making personal investments to better our community. And I think right now we should be standing behind them, we should be supporting them, and we should be thanking them. Not only that, we should be treating them equally. And if we said back in June of 2024 that all the boxes were checked, I kind of have to wonder why we're sitting here today still having this conversation, and why this hasn't happened already. But I'm hopeful that the select board will be able to move quickly and provide this. On another note for Gifford, thank you for this hotel. We have actually been able to review our housing assets and have one of our buildings for sale because we no longer need that on our inventory because we have the hotel to use instead. So that would be beneficial for for our organization financially.
And for the housing need, right? You get somebody permanently versus few months. Would you like to jump on?
Yes, I would. I'm Peter Reed. I'm with RACDC currently. But I was involved in the R3 process that we did 7 or 8 years ago. We had over 300 people in a room. And the number one thing they came up with in terms of the economy, what we needed here was a hotel. And to me, as Joe said, this is a really a no-brainer. I think we should be supporting them. And I think that's what people in town want. At least they did 7 years ago, and they probably wanted more now that the hotel is here.
Do you have any additional questions from any of the board members? Anybody else?
I have, I snuck down. So just speaking about how you guys did it in the past. If you're going to do the stabilization, in the past, you've made some confusing fiscal years versus grand list years. The fiscal year is July, but the tax bills go out in September. You know, taxes are due October, March. So if you use a grand list year, it makes it a lot easier for everyone to figure out what is owed and what's being stabilized on the tax bill. That'd be good for us and finance and probably
I would love that meeting. That's
the business
That's
owners.
awesome.
So I want to make that suggestion. And that being
Rates are
said,
fiscal year basis though.
yeah, but just like everybody else, they have their assessed value at the grand this year. Whatever you guys do, I'm gonna implement, but that makes it easier. And then the grand list year between now and maybe 2030 might change from April 1 to Jan 1. So that's something to take in account, that we might have a new grand list year. So you put in an exact date. I don't know what that does to.
Just prorate it.
Yeah, so that's all. That makes it easier for everyone. You just tell me, and just be clear. Just please be clear. It makes it easier for everyone.
Okay.
Oh, wait.
That's what I love about you.
Speaking about being clear, please be clear of if there's a reappraisal year, what happens? Please be clear on if development happens beyond what is developed now, like, you know, please make that clear. If it includes future development, if it doesn't include future development. You know, if they get more rooms,
Fair enough.
you know,
Yeah.
just be clear. And then I can do my job.
If we get to the point where we can do more rooms, I'd be tickled pink to do
But
that.
that's it, just things to think about, because the past contracts have not always been so clear.
Great.
Okay, seeing none, we're gonna move on through the agenda and take this up in executive session. So,
Evening or?
yeah, well, hopefully Larry has to jump off around 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So I think our next item is just the manager's report, which there's not much. So we'll go right into executive session.
Would you like us to be here for that or? would you like us to-
No, I think it's just the board.
Okay, all right. We're just trying to get
So I
an
think,
idea on
I
the.
think at this
Available if you
point,
need us.
thank you all for coming.
All right.
And you're welcome to go. unless you
Great.
wanna listen to us
Thank you
make
very
the
much.
motions to go into
We appreciate you folks'
executive
time.
Sorry, Trevor, I just really don't wanna miss your manager's report, but I'm hungry.
session.
I understand.
Fair.
Thank you.
Is there anything else in the manager's report?
No,
Okay,
I'm
so,
upset.
we, need a motion to find that we need to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed? And a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.